Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're kind of peeling back the layers, aren't we? Looking past the spectacle of royal weddings.
Yes, beyond the feasts and the finery, we're focusing on the wedding night itself.
Specifically, the often hidden, frankly terrifying reality for young medieval and early modern queens.
Yeah.
It's not the romance we often imagine.
Not at all. You know, when we talk about a royal wedding night back then, it was rarely, if ever, private.
Right.
It wasn't really about love or even attraction most times. It was a very high-stakes public ritual.
Like the final seal on a deal.
Exactly. The closing argument for a diplomatic contract, sometimes drawn up years, even decades before. And for the dynasty involved, the young woman's body was, well, essentially a vessel.
A vessel expected to produce heirs. Legitimate heirs.
Precisely. And failure. Well, failure wasn't really contemplated, or at least it was dreaded.
That pressure, the immediacy of that expectation, combined with just how vulnerable they were. That's the thread we're pulling today, isn't it?
It is. The fear of failing, fear of the unknown physical experience, fear of disgrace, even annulment if the union wasn't, validated. It hung over everything.
And this is where it gets quite confronting. Our sources show the average age for these high-profile royal brides. It often ranged from just 12 to 15 years old.
It's easy to just hear those numbers, 12, 15, but you really have to pause and picture it.
Yeah.
These were children, sometimes barely women, physiologically speaking, thrown into this immense pressure cooker of dynastic expectation.
And you mentioned privacy,
Yeah.
or the lack of it. That adds another layer of, well, horror, almost.
He does. Privacy as we know it. A myth in this context. Witnesses were common. We have accounts of officials, court members,
Courting nearby.
sometimes described as lurking behind curtains or maybe just outside the chamber door, but close enough to verify consummation happened.
Why? For proof.
Yes, proof for the sake of legitimacy. The political stability of the whole alliance, the treaty, could hinge on that confirmation.
Let's make this concrete. Talk us through a specific case. Matilda of England seems like a brutal example. Born around 1102.
That's right. Daughter of King Henry III of England. And essentially, from birth, she was a political pawn. Her father needed an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire.
So what happened?
She was betrothed at age seven, to Emperor Henry V, who was in his late 20s at the time.
Betrothed at 7.
And then dispatched to Germany in 1110 AD. So she was about 8. Basically sent away to be raised, molded into an empress for 4 years before the actual wedding.
So the wedding itself, that was January 7th, 1114, in Mainz.
Correct. And at that point, Matilda was 12 years old.
12. Facing the emperor.
12 years old, yielding to a 28-year-old ruler, a powerful man used to getting his way. And the ritual of that night demanded the act prove 2 things.
Her purity, presumably?
Yes, her virginity was assumed and needed symbolic proof. But just as importantly, his potency, his ability to father heirs.
And with those witnesses potentially nearby.
The pressure to, perform successfully immediately must have been immense. On both of them, perhaps, but overwhelmingly on her.
How did it play out politically when things didn't go as planned, when heirs didn't arrive? Because that happened with Matilda, right?
It did, and that failure, the lack of children, absolutely defined her subsequent life. Henry V died childless in 1125.
Leaving Matilda a widow.
A widow at 23. Now, she was respected as an empress, but she returned to Normandy without having fulfilled that primary dynastic function.
And it didn't matter why there were no children.
Not politically. The fact remained, no heir. That failure haunted her. It amplified her political isolation later and directly fueled the chaos, the civil war known as the Anarchy, when she later tried to claim the English throne for herself.
So the consequences of that wedding night, or the lack of fruit from it, echoed for decades.
Absolutely. Directly led to war.
Okay, so Matilda faced the terror of physical duty and dynastic failure. Let's pivot slightly. What about incompatibility? Emotional distance. Eleanor of Aquitaine comes to mind.
Eleanor. A fascinating figure. Born around 1122, and at 15, in 1137, she inherited Aquitaine, one of Europe's richest, most powerful duchies.
Making her instantly the most eligible heiress around.
Absolutely. A massive prize. So her marriage to Louis VII of France was arranged incredibly quickly. July 25th, 1137.
A huge political merger, right? Bringing Aquitaine under the French crown's influence.
That was the goal. Unite those vast lands with the Capetian dynasty.
But Louis VII, the sources paint him as intensely pious. More monk than monarch is a phrase I've seen. How'd that impact the wedding night expectations? the court still wanted heirs.
That created a really difficult, almost impossible tension. The demand on Eleanor was crystal clear: produce sons.
But Louis,
Louis's deep religious scruples apparently made him, well, awkward about intimacy, maybe even viewed physical pleasure, even within marriage, as inherently sinful, something to be endured for duty, not enjoyed.
so Eleanor had to navigate that, trying to fulfill her dynastic duty with a husband who might have been reluctant or at least uncomfortable.
Exactly. An inexperienced, deeply pious husband, while the entire French court is practically counting the months waiting for a male heir.
That sounds like a recipe for frustration. Years of it, maybe.
And it was. It wasn't an immediate disaster, but the tension built. The marriage ultimately produced only daughters, Marie and Alex.
No sons.
No sons. And after more than a decade, that failure to secure the male line became unbearable for the dynasty. It fueled the growing incompatibility and led to their annulment in 1152.
On what grounds?
Officially, the convenient pretext was consanguinity, that they were too closely related, technically cousins.
Ah, that old excuse.
A very common tool. But the underlying reality was dynastic failure. No male heir.
Okay, so awkward piety is one thing. But Isabella of France,
Yeah.
she faced something else entirely on her wedding night, didn't she? Utter public humiliation.
Isabella's story is stark. Another valuable princess, born around 1295, married Edward II of England when she was just 12, January 25th, 1308.
Again, incredibly young, sent to England to secure peace, produce heirs, the usual.
The usual expectations. But instead, she was immediately and very publicly sidelined.
Right, the incident at the wedding banquet. It's infamous.
It is. Edward showered gifts and attention not on his new queen, but on his favorite courtier, Piers Gaveston.
Seated Gaveston right next to him, didn't he? While Isabella was sort of pushed aside.
Exactly. Relegated to the fringes, while the king openly doted on Gaveston. And critically, this wasn't private.
Her French relatives were there.
Yes, her powerful uncles were present watching this unfold. Imagine their fury, their humiliation. Edward was showing blatant indifference, even contempt for his bride and the alliance she represented.
So her fear wasn't just the physical unknown, but immediate political irrelevance.
Precisely. The psychological terror of being made insignificant on day one. And the chronicles hint strongly at a lack of, shall we say, ardor from Edward towards her.
Implying the marriage might not have been consummated quickly, or was just unfulfilling.
Yes, those whispers are there, which, without the swift promise of an heir, made her position incredibly precarious right from the start.
And that initial insult, that humiliation, it didn't just fade away, it festered.
Absolutely. It became foundational. That public slight, followed by years of Edward's favoritism towards others and his general neglect of her status, it fueled her transformation.
From pawn to player.
From pawn to the she-wolf of France, as she became known. She eventually used Edward's disrespect, starting right back at that wedding feast, to build support against him.
Leading to his deposition.
Yes, returning from France with allies and deposing him in 1326. That moment of vulnerability on her wedding night ultimately forged a ruthless political operator.
Let's shift focus again. Matilda of Flanders? Her situation involved a different kind of pressure. More spiritual. A papal curse.
That's right. Matilda, born around 1031, married William, Duke of Normandy, later the Conqueror around 1051. But their marriage was explicitly banned by Pope Leo IX.
Why?
Consanguinity again. They were distant cousins, deemed too closely related by blood according to church law at the time, and the papacy often used this rule strategically.
To exert influence over rulers.
Exactly. So if they went ahead with the marriage, despite the ban, what was the big fear hanging over their wedding night?
Illegitimacy.
Profoundly. The fear was that the Pope's curse, potentially excommunication, would render any children illegitimate in the eyes of God and the Church.
Which would destroy the dynasty's future.
Completely. Their power, their lands, couldn't be legally passed down. It was a massive spiritual and political crisis.
How did they resolve it? They did marry, obviously.
They did. It took years, but they eventually appeased the church. They founded two major abbeys in Caen as penance, the Abbey aux Hommes and the Abbey aux Dames.
Buying their way back into favor.
Essentially, yes. This act of piety secured them a papal dispensation, a retroactive approval in 1059, several years after the wedding.
And the outcome in terms of heirs.
Quite remarkable, actually. Matilda proved incredibly fertile. She bore William 9 or 10 children, including 2 future kings of England.
So her fertility was seen as
What?
Vindication.
Absolutely. By the Normans, it was viewed almost as a divine statement, a triumph over those initial fears, validating their defiance of the Pope's initial ban. She delivered precisely what the dynasty needed most.
Okay, that brings us to probably one of the most physically harrowing stories. Margaret Beaufort. Her experience really highlights the potential physical cruelty involved.
Margaret Beaufort's story is frankly brutal. Born 1443, a key figure with Lancastrian claims during the Wars of the Roses.
And married off very young.
Extremely young, married to Edmund Tudor on November 1st, 1455. She was 12, Edmund was 24.
12 years old. And given the political turmoil,
The marriage was consummated immediately. Dynastic urgency trumped everything.
the consequences were almost instant, weren't they?
Yeah.
And devastating.
Tragically swift. Margaret was pregnant by early 1456, but then Edmund died suddenly of the plague later that year.
Leaving her pregnant, widowed, and still a child herself.
Exactly. She gave birth to her son, the future Henry VII, at Pembroke Castle on January 28, 1457. She had just turned 13.
13 years old, giving birth.
The sources are quite clear about the physical toll. Childbirth at such a dangerously young age caused severe, permanent internal injuries.
Leaving her unable to have more children.
Correct. It rendered her barren for the rest of her life. The agony left literal scars.
So Henry VII was her only child.
Her sole child, a miracle amid trauma, as one historian put it. That physical reality, the trauma stemming directly from that early consummation and birth, defined her entire life.
Making Henry her single focus.
Absolutely. She couldn't produce a spare. He was everything. It fueled her intense piety, but also her incredibly shrewd and ruthless political maneuvering over decades to ensure his survival and eventual path to the throne. Her body's limitation became her political drive.
Just briefly, let's touch on Margaret of Anjou. Another Margaret, another difficult situation.
Yeah.
Married Henry VI at 15 in 1445.
Right, this was about securing peace, or at least a truce, in the 100 Years' War. But Henry VI was already known to be fragile.
So her fear wasn't necessarily physical, but about the stability of her husband and the future.
Yes, fear of the unknown. A foreign queen in England married to a king prone to saintly abstractions, as some called it, or periods of complete mental withdrawal.
Atatonia, basically.
Increasingly so, yes. The pressure was immense, not just for an heir, but for an heir whose legitimacy wouldn't be questioned due to the king's state.
Did pregnancy happen quickly?
No, it didn't, which itself likely caused anxiety. When their son, Edward of Westminster, was finally born in 1453, Henry VI was deep in a catatonic state.
Leading to immediate suspicion.
Instant whispers and accusations of illegitimacy, who was the real father. So those initial quiet fears Margaret must have felt on her wedding night about her husband's fragility and the security of their line
They exploded into open conflict.
exploded into the Wars of the Roses. She spent her life fighting fiercely, often leading armies herself, to defend her son's claim, a claim constantly undermined by questions rooted in his father's condition around the time of his conception.
Looking back across all these women, Matilda, Eleanor, Isabella, the other Matilda, Margaret Beaufort, Margaret of Anjou, it's just incredibly stark, isn't it? Their most private moments were public political acts.
It really is. The synthesis here is quite brutal, and it's something, you should really take away. These women, often children, were defined by this extreme vulnerability on their wedding nights.
Their worth measured in sons.
Almost exclusively, yes. Their dynastic value hinged on their fertility. Failure wasn't just personal disappointment. It could mean disgrace, annulment, political instability, even war. Their bodies were quite literally battlegrounds where the fate of kingdoms was contested.
So a final thought for you, our listener. When we read about these powerful medieval women later in their lives, Isabella the She-Wolf, Margaret Beaufort the Kingmaker, how much of that renowned ambition, that ruthlessness even, was forged in the fire of that initial terrifying vulnerability?
Was it ambition as we understand it? Or was it a kind of desperate political necessity, born from surviving an almost unbelievable physical and psychological ordeal that began on their wedding night?
What an unexpected and frankly brutal cost the structures of medieval power placed on these individual young women. Something to think about next time you encounter these queens in history.